I was born in Alexandria, Louisiana in 1952, middle of the baby boomer years, to George and Tony Foote, middle child of 7, and was raised in Alexandria. And other than college and law school, I pretty much stayed in Alexandria until moving to Shreveport. I am a product, I was educated in the public school system in Alexandria, grammar school, junior high, went to Bolton High School, graduated in 1970, and really, I think, got a great public school education. Then I went to Duke University and ran into people that had been academically prepared in the boarding schools, and was flabbergasted. I mean, there was some catch-up time, both academically, and there was a lot of different thought. It was the first time to have really immersion into a different culture of people. Remember, this was the year after the students took over the university administration building at Duke. This was the height of the Vietnam War. And I spent 2 years at Duke, and then I did an independent year at the University of Manchester in England, which proved to be transformative. In the middle of the Vietnam War, or actually into the Vietnam War, I got a chance to live among foreigners, not foreign there, I mean, we're in England, and got a chance to look back at the United States through a different set of eyes. And while I still believe we are the best country in the world, it gave me a real perspective that maybe we're not a perfect country, and that there were some things that we did in the name of justice that I don't think really were right. But my father was a Marine Corps colonel, had 4 landings in the Pacific in World War II, was, like most of that greatest generation, very quiet about it. And my father and my mother raised us in the Methodist tradition, and we were taught from a very early age to do as much as you can for as many as you can for as long as you can. I mean, it's a pure John Wesley that public service was ingrained. But more importantly, my father did bunches of civics work, was very, very successful, and he gave me some advice that probably was the most important that I got. And that was, if you can get a committee of 4 people who do not want credit for what they're doing, you can accomplish anything. So the combination between my parents instilling you have an obligation to help others and do not let ego get in the way of helping others was a lesson learned and not really brought to fruition until many years later. Daddy was a city court judge for over 30 years, and so I grew up at a judge's table. And that was our conversation, is fairness, a balance of individual rights, a balance of religious rights, a balance of what a family does as a family. I like to say that, you know, we were not wealthy, but we were rich. We had one of those families that would pile 9 of us in a car and drive across Texas to camp out at Philmont Scout Ranch. And they were very formative stages to have that much family. I mean, with 6 brothers, you have to work some teamwork or you get bruised. I mean, there's a lot of that was taught in that, but it was a continuation of his lessons on don't go for the glory, don't seek the recognition, go for the accomplishment of what you're trying to serve. I worked as a photographer, I worked as selling life insurance, I worked in the courthouse, which was probably the most important education I got because I saw how our courthouse runs from the clerking side. I basically took a gap year. I'd wanted to be a lawyer all my life until my senior year in college, and then with a degree in philosophy and political science, double major, very marketable skills, I decided not to go to law school. And so my parents said, you don't have to go to law school, but you got to support yourself. And that was a life lesson. Well, it took about 6 months of working as a photographer to realize there's a better way to make a living, and that was not going to pursue the goal of doing good. So I went back to law school. Nobody just slips up and ends up becoming a lawyer. you have to go for a purpose, whether it's to make a living, to support my family, to right wrongs, to change the world. Everybody has a motivation for going to law school, and I was blessed to be at a time when we were going to go to law school to use the institutions of government to better the world. The first day of law school was the most transformative day of my life, and it had absolutely nothing to do with law school. On the first day of law school, I met Beth Ernie, and here 42 years later, we are still together. I remember being a newlywed through law school. I treated law school more as a trade school. I went to learn to well words together to accomplish what I needed to represent my clients. And it was not a great philosophical approach to me, which having a degree in philosophy was kind of an interesting twist for me. But in law school, I realized there were so many opportunities that the law provided to do good. Coming back onto the upbringing that we had, this was an opportunity that you could go out and serve people. When we got out of law school, we came back to Alexandria to practice. My wife clerked for Judge Culpepper. I went into the remnants of my father's firm. He was going to be a full-time judge. She later came to practice in that firm, and we had we're partnerable associates together, and we stayed in that firm together for a couple of years. I then left and started my own firm with Vic Suter, a friend from the second grade, Suter and Foote in Alexandria, and had a general practice. That's where we developed the clients, and that's where I decided to run for judge. And as Vic said, it's kind of strange. If I support you, people think I'm trying to get rid of you. If I don't, people think you're not worth being a judge. It was interesting with the two-member partnership, but it was a fabulous partnership. And we shared many of the same values. So the practice of law went with my wife, a separate partnership, judging, then back with my wife. I think she was quoted as saying, "I can't have Ross wandering the streets." But in any event, we got back to work with her law firm, and then when she left, I stayed on. So our path together in law has kind of been like a Bob Dylan song. The lyrics and the music start at the same time and end at the same time, but they really aren't synchronized in between. You know, it's we can get along. Judge Al Mansour was the senior judge in our district and took me under his wing as a mentor. And I could stop in his office anytime and say, "Judge, I don't understand what this is." He always had time for a question. He never gave me an answer, and I never walked out without knowing what to do. He was a magician. He was a mentor's mentor. And he taught me the value of having an experienced person take the time to guide you. Plus, he would encourage any new program that I wanted. I decided that we were having too many probationers who failed probation because that was their introduction into the system. And you have to remember, I had no real criminal experience going into the court. The first day in court was in criminal court, and at the end of it, I had quadrupled my time in a criminal courtroom. That's how scary it is to have that kind of power invested, and it didn't terrify me, it more challenged me, but to rise to the level to do what you needed to do with the judiciary was going to be very, very difficult until Al Mansour stepped in. So when I went to him and said, these probationers are not making probation just because they don't know and don't understand, he said, well, educate them. Best way to educate them, I decided, was to get probationers who were successful to come in and talk to them. It worked, and we have what we call the PEP squad, probationers educating probationers. And that's when I began to understand the power of being a judge. The honorable in front of your name, when you say, let's try this, is enormous. When I went back into private practice, I was doing the collaborative work and trying to facilitate some of the local things. And the firm that I was with, the David Smith firm, did a lot of class action antitrust work. And if somebody had told me coming out of law school that I would be a class action plaintiff in antitrust cases, I would have laughed at them. But again, this was a set of cases that proceeded against people that were blocking generic drugs from coming to market. And it was a body of law where I saw there could be benefit to millions of people, and you don't get that opportunity very often. I was able to take my judicial experience and meet with clients, and I didn't do any of the courtroom work, but I was able to bring a perspective of this is what's going to sell to a judge. So using my experiences from the bench, it was easier to go back into the practice of law from an advisory capacity. I was asked to teach a constitutional law course to some judges from Kazakhstan. This is right after the breakup of the Russian Empire. And when I explained to them that as a judge, I could erase a law as unconstitutional because the people did not give the government permission to make that law, the question asked was, if you do that, are you shot? So again, it was a wake up to how good our system is and how the rest of the world is pretty much in awe at the power of our judiciary, and kind of proud to have been a part of that. So I continue with the education program. When Justice Kimball asked me to get back involved, I said I would do it on two conditions. One, that I would be able to design the curriculum any way I wanted, and second, that I could have Judge Madeline Landrieu as my assistant. Lee Irvin, the city court judge, called me and said, why don't you come help us out at city court? It's an ad hoc basis. I had not sat as a judge since my retirement. I'd moved to other things. With Beth becoming a judge, the interest started perking back up. I started remembering the opportunities that the judiciary provided. So I went to sit for city court, ad hoc, and was immediately plugged back into humanity on the street. And I realized when you're doing class action antitrust work, you're in an intellectual bubble that really does not translate to what's happening to the person on the street. So in city court, got my feet wet again and really grew to love doing the work. And they, thank goodness, kept asking me to ad hoc. Good group of judges that were interested in doing right. So the old itch of, you've got committed people here, let's do something with them, came back up, and sure enough, the judges agreed to some pretty progressive things. I mean, people talk about Shreveport being behind the times, but the city judges at city court in Shreveport took a wild hair idea that we just tossed out of, let's get rid of bonds, because we're really just hammering people for no reason, and the person that's arrested for jaywalking or simple battery or assault is not really a danger, but we're costing them money, and we're creating tension, much like a Ferguson situation. It's just a harassment type thing, I felt, and they kind of agreed. So I got to bring in a different set of eyes, but to their credit, they developed a protocol and they developed a position, and they essentially did away with bonds except in domestic violence and things where there was public safety at risk. That was, a judge doesn't care who wins. A judge cares there's an even playing field. And when the field is not even because of resources applied, then you got to get involved. Well, our system, there was a clean sweep. They started over and created a whole new board. And I was asked to be a judicial representative on the board. So I'm now serving on the Public Defender's Board. And again, it is a chance for me to reflect on what all the great people I've had a chance to deal with have taught me over this time, and try to give some of that back. I guess the legacy I would have would be that I was a public servant. I guess what I would want to do is to say that I left the world a better place, and that I did help as many people as I could, as often as I could, and as deep as I could.